spoken with the negotiators. I'm hopeful that sometime after Memorial Day we'll have an agreement on the George Floyd legislation, and so I'm optimistic.
That's the president talking about the police reform bill that he was hoping would have hit his desk by yesterday, that the anniversary of the killing of George Floyd. It's already passed the House, and the lead Senate negotiators, Democrat Cory Booker and Republican Tim Scott, they also are optimistic.
Well, I think it's more likely than not. We've made a lot of progress. I think we can get something really meaningful and substantive done that will save Black lives.
But they were making the kind of progress that we need to make.
And can you actually see that you're going to reach a compromise? Feel confident?
I think I should only speak about what I'm completely confident of, and I'm confident that we're making progress.
Now, the bill that got through the House, it would ban chokeholds and no-knock warrants and also create a national database listing incidents of police misconduct, among other things. But the biggest sticking point of now, as we understand it, is qualified immunity. That's what shields police from most civil lawsuits. Democrats, they want to roll back qualified immunity. Republicans, they've raised concerns saying it could cause cops to face floods of lawsuits that will impair their ability to fight crime. Talk about qualified immunity. Is there a middle ground here where you don't, every single time there's an arrest, it turns into possible litigation that has to be defended? Is there some place there in the middle? As mentioned before here, you've been on both sides of this.
Absolutely, and we do civil rights work as well. The reality is that out of all the people who call us with civil rights claims, there are very few that we're able to actually take. And sometimes we look at it and we may say, look, the police didn't do anything that would be wrong under the law here. But you still have a burden. Just as a prosecutor has a burden in a criminal case, you've got to be able to meet your burden in order to win. When you look at qualified immunity, the thing that's fascinating to me is that it basically is a creature of the Supreme Court. And many of the people who are in support of it are against activist courts. But for an activist court, we wouldn't even have the doctrine of qualified immunity. And what it basically does is it says that if you can find any reasonable officer out there who might have acted the way you did, that you should be shielded. So I tend to think that if we look at liability in terms of the municipality covering officers for mistakes, just as we would for insurance. If it's negligence, then you should be covered for that mistake. But also imposing some liability on the part of the police officers when they engage in misconduct that's intentional or reckless, like a Derek Chauvin, or perhaps like the officers who lied about what happened and claimed that, I forget the gentleman's last name, but that he passed away as a result of an automobile accident instead of that we beat him to death. Well, those people should not be covered by qualified immunity. They should not be covered based upon the municipality having to have the total burden in terms of liability. In those cases, they should have to indemnify the municipality and say, look, you know what, we've engaged in this wrongdoing, in this misconduct, and now we're going to pay you back, because why should the taxpayers bear that burden?
You guys have kept, I know, relationships with people still on the law enforcement side. As I mentioned before, you guys have all been prosecutors now on the defense side. We have had an overdue reckoning in the last year in terms of that there are two different forms of justice depending on color of skin. And I think even for people who weren't sure of that, it's hard to argue that. But the question is, when I look at the numbers for the violent crime spikes and you look at where they're centered, particularly in inner cities and communities of color where this is spiked, have we run the risk that the very people who need the most amount of protection right now, and there's millions of reasons as to why or why not, that protection may be jeopardized because that there is a reconsideration of what law enforcement should or shouldn't be doing right now, and it's having an impact on getting into those areas and creating safety?
I do worry that law enforcement, that police with boots on the ground are going to say, I'm not going there, or I'm not going to do this, or I'm not going to do that, because if I get into a situation, then I'm going to be charged with a crime or or whatever. But I don't think it's very difficult to understand that you don't beat somebody to death, you don't abuse people, that's not necessary, and that nobody is asking you to not do your job and to not react to a dangerous situation proportionately and the way you are trained. And so I think that really what it all comes down to, however we land here, training is important. Getting rid of those who are not doing it the right way, those who are intent on committing these acts, getting rid of those officers is the right way to do it. But we need training. It is not difficult for anybody to understand that you need to treat people with respect. And
I agree.
Think anybody is saying
there are
don't
certain
react.
stories where you have 6 people in a room and 3 people will say, well, 3 in the morning, it's dark out, you don't know what the guy's got in his hand. Of course, I understand what the cop did. And 3 other people saying, wait a minute, you know, he didn't or she didn't have to pull the trigger to do that. We still get into a subjective area. I'd like to know from all you guys, and it's interesting, I'm hearing conversations about maybe we want to re-examine which crimes either require force or even pursuit. And I think that brings up a whole host of debates as to unintended consequences. If you're not going to, let's say, chase a stolen car, or if there's petty theft, if you choose or not to pursue. But give me, and I'll start with you, Doug, give me a meaningful piece of reform that you think would make overall justice better.
I mean, Rich, everything should be reformed on a daily basis, not only in law enforcement, but everything we do. You should be constantly re-examining everything, trying to do anything that's done, you should try to do it better on a daily basis. You know, I'm thinking about these cases. It's very easy when we look at George Floyd to say what we saw was horrible, it was terrible. Where the rubber meets the road is the minor cases, where you have a police officer out there who's he arrives at somebody's house and he's trying to break up a couple in an argument, and there's a small child there, and he's trying to keep the child safe at the same time, and then something happens. That doesn't fit squarely into a training program. There's a certain amount of discretion that goes involved. This is not a computer program that you can put in A, B, and you get C. You have to give a certain amount of discretion to the people that are in the field, and at a certain level you have to understand that things do go wrong, and not everything that goes wrong is a criminal act, and not everything is a huge civil case.
And I want to ask you the same question. Give me one proposed reform. And do you think that from a year ago to now, you've seen tangible progress, or you've heard a lot of words, but we're still right back where we were before?
I've seen tangible progress, and I think that there's a lot more to come. One of the things that I think has been tremendous is ABLE, and that's the active bystandership for law enforcement. And what that does is it empowers every single person in the organization to be accountable to every other person. So you could be the new hire, and you are able to step in and to intervene if you see the chief engaged in misconduct. And it deals with officer wellness. It also deals with the wellness of the community. And if they go hand in hand, I think that it goes a long way toward addressing these issues.
And even in a certain way, we saw that in Minnesota with a dispatcher who called in and said, call me snitch if you want, but I see something wrong here.
Right.
Real quickly, same to you. Give me a reform that you think, if a year from now we sat down here, you'd say that made a difference.
I think that qualified immunity should be non-existent for criminal acts that are proven. I think that that would have a deterrent effect. I think that in the beginning there needs to be implemented some very significant training. And I think that within the training, when it comes to those more minor crimes, there need to be very strict guidelines as to how to proceed. I really do think that with the appropriate training, you're not going to be in a position where you're opening a door into a dark room where, of course, you don't know what the person has or doesn't have. The appropriate training, which is in place now, should tell you you don't open that door. You take appropriate steps before you open that door. And good training is going to show police officers, or at least help them not be in that position.
And I'll say this, I haven't heard anybody who says get rid of policing.
No.
That's crazy.
No.
But maybe a reconsideration of what's the best use of resources, where maybe you do want a mental health specialist on staff to be going with the cops in the field here to help diffuse it. So there's a lot of different ways, but I take it that we are in a better place than we were a year ago, still with a long, long ways to go. All right, we come back lightning round. Three guys here, three different stories, all involving COVID. We'll take a look at legal issues surrounding the pandemic in the workplace, the courts, and basically any place where people gather.